to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Lottie.
Hi, I'm Lottie Lackey.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you want me to introduce myself?
Recently married. I threw me off for a second. I said, you just said the wrong name.
Yeah.
Then I realized, yeah. Well,
I do that sometimes, so
yeah.
I get why you say that.
And the one and only Mark Ashton.
Yeah, hey there, polka fans.
Your last name hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed.
It's the same.
Exactly the same as the last time.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex.
Happy birthday, Will Smith, if you're listening.
Okay, all right.
Yep, it's his birthday the day this releases.
Oh, okay.
September
All right.
23rd.
All right. Well,
Just slap me upside the head.
Yeah, yeah, it might happen.
hopefully he's doing well. A lot going
I
on
haven't
there.
heard from him in a while.
All right. Well, we're just going to jump right into the meat of this episode. Today, we're talking about student loan forgiveness. President Biden announced a sweeping student loan forgiveness plan last month that will cancel up to $20,000 in certain student loans for qualifying borrowers. This has sparked a lot of controversy, a lot of debate, and I think we thought, well, let's talk about it because this is something that's at the forefront of people's minds right now. There's, how do we look at this as Christ followers? Just how do we engage in the discourse around it? What does it mean for us? And I think having several different perspectives around the table is going to be really helpful for that. So while let's just jump into that. Lottie, if you want to start, what's your experience with choosing a college and the options you had to pay for schooling? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so neither of my parents went to college, and so I didn't really there was a lot of pressure coming from them to go because they were like, hey, we want you to be able to get a job and make more money than we make and just be more well off. And so when I was graduating high school, I decided to go to community college for free for a year just to save money, because saving money was just like a huge concern. My family didn't have money set aside for me for college, and so just having it paid for sounded like the ideal option. And then a year into community college, I just felt the Lord leading me to Bible school, to Crown College, and I applied. And I just did a ton of research because I had to, knowing that it was going to be expensive going to a private Christian school. And I think that, my experience was unique because I had to know, hey, what was I spending? I knew I wasn't going to have a ton of help. And so I did, me and my mom did a ton of research on loans and how that was going to work. And so I do have debt from that. I did 3 years at Crown before I graduated. And I think that, I think that most of my friends and people I know that are my age who went to college are in a similar position debt-wise to me. So it's kind of interesting. But, so that's kind of about where I stand and what my experience was like.
Okay, great. Mark, do you have an experience you'd want to share on that? What was your college experience like?
Yeah, so I went to state school, University of Illinois is where I did my undergrad. And, the way we paid for it was small scholarships, but mostly I paid for it. I saved for it my whole life up until that point. Worked while I was in college. My parents helped me out. So I graduated debt-free. Very thankful for that. And then we've had 4 kids who have been through the college experience as well, much more recently. Haven's still in school. And, the cost of college has gone up by double or more, depending on the college, since 1991 when I graduated and my kids going to school. So the cost is enormous. We learned to play the scholarship game really, really well. And so 3 of our kids got huge scholarships to go to school. And then they had to pay, and then we had to pay, and then grandma had to pay. And so kind of between all those generations, we're able to graduate our kids debt-free. 2 of them done, one of them almost done. One of them decided he's the one who didn't get the big scholarships. He decided college was not for him, and it was just not worthwhile to invest all of that money into something that he didn't know the trajectory of his life. He didn't have any plan put together, so investing in college wasn't the best idea for him.
Yeah, for me, kind of similar to Lottie. My parents, neither of them graduated full undergrad, and then they went back. My dad went back when he was a little older, and did the schooling thing as he was parenting us, but not the traditional kind of route right out of high school. And so, their parents, didn't save for college. It wasn't quite an expectation. He helped take over a family business. And so that was kind of the route that, his parents kind of set forth for him. And then when he got into ministry stuff, wanted to go back to school. So my parents didn't really plan for it, didn't save for it. I mean, I had a ton of siblings as well. And so there was just not, the pool would have been very small, by the time we dipped into all of that. And so for me, I felt called into ministry from a young age and always knew, okay, the next step or the best step is kind of a specialty school, aka a Bible college. And so that's going to be a private school, and kind of researched all those and ended up at Grace University, which is, we'll have a moment of silence for now, no longer with us. Yeah. And so scholarships, I mean, I applied for some scholarships, but scholarships at a private school like that, the ability to get them, there's not endowments or quite all of the funds that maybe that a state school would have and things like that. And so even when applying for scholarships, you're pretty limited about what you can get. I got a few $500 scholarships here and there from my church or whatever, but the price of a private school also is much more expensive traditionally. And so graduated from college with a significant amount of debt. And my parents didn't really talk to me about saving that. They didn't save for it. The potential, I played basketball when I was there, but it was not a scholarship kind of basketball thing. So the time to work wasn't really available, but it was a passion thing. And so just kind of chipped away and added more and more to the loan process year by year. And yeah, graduated with, a pretty significant amount of student loan debt. There was an expectation at that school to live in the dorms for at least your first year.
Yeah.
No discount for that, but that's kind of expected, and so you're adding even more, even though I didn't want to. So probably 2 years into college, I decided college wasn't for me because I didn't really want to go, but I still finished because I was like, the reality of how the system works is if I want to work at a church, if I don't have any kind of Bible education, the chances of getting a job probably aren't going to be very great, at that point if I quit college or whatever. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to keep doing this, pursue. I committed to it and finished, but probably not with a lot of passion, but I felt like it was my only choice if I wanted to get a job realistically and work in a church, have a resume. So that was kind of my experience. My wife, similar, because once we get married, you inherit one another's debt, right? And so she had a lot of student loan debt because same experience. Her parents didn't go to college. She wanted to be an educator, and so she went to a state school, but and got some scholarships, but definitely about a third of the debt that I had. And so mine was much more gigantic than what she was dealing with. But yeah, that was kind of it. And then got married pretty young and started here at the church, making a ton of money, paid those back with almost instantly.
Right.
And so that, it was kind of my story in reality. So
Yeah.
How about you, Eric?
Yeah, my story is going to be probably quite different than the rest of yours, but it's not very long. I didn't go to college. I don't have a degree. I audited some classes, but most of my career trajectory was just getting into the field that I was passionate about, and was fortunate enough to work my way through those things into where I had the experience to move forward. And that is not an easy path that I would suggest for even my own children, because there's a lot of different types of sacrifices that come along the way in that route. But it is something that, I mean, this conversation is a little bit even out of my scope, because I'm just like, I'm not living with that. I have friends who had immense debt, and I've had a lot of conversations with them, but that's something that I haven't had, thankfully, over my head. So that's kind of my story. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, when we're talking about debt, there's a lot of student debt specifically. There are a lot of different statistics around that we looked at, that we researched. Alex, I know you prepared a few of those. If you want to just kind of run through them, and if anybody has any more to add to that, I think that would be helpful in this conversation.
Yeah. So some of the research says that student loan debt crisis, and so they call it a crisis, affects over 43 million Americans. So debt levels have prompted legislative action. And this has been stuff that's happened outside of the Biden administration for how do we figure out loan forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. But the current state is Americans owe a total of $1.75 trillion in federal and private student loan debt combined. Federal student loans are $1.61 trillion alone, just that's been borrowed from the government. 15% of all American adults report they have outstanding undergraduate student debt. 12.4% of student loan debt repayment is delinquent. As of March 2020, 42.9 federal borrowers and up to 3 million private loans owe student loan debt. And in 1996, just the average person left school owing $12,750. And then 2001, that number was $21,930. So just to point out,
2021,
in 2021, that's grown. The debt, that people are leaving school with has nearly doubled since 1996, and so those are just some of the stats. I don't know if anyone wants to throw in other things, but big numbers.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and it's amazing how many people are crippled by debt coming out of college. I know oftentimes as we're hiring people here, one of the things we check into is their financial background, and it's amazing how much debt people have coming in. And of course, as Alex alluded to, surviving on a ministry-level income with a massive amount of debt is a huge challenge to be able to overcome.
I think that going into ministry, I remember my parents were super stressed. They were like, you're never going to be able to pay off your debt because I don't even know if you're going to get a job, just like the unknowns of that. And I think that one thing that's kind of helped me out, or that I think is cool, is that different denominations will help with loan repayment and things like that. So that's an option that I have explored and that me and my husband both have taken advantage of through the Christian Missionary Alliance, which is super awesome, knowing that they set aside money to help people get in, people who are in ministry get out of debt so that you have more opportunity to go overseas or do different things. And so, yeah, I think that going into ministry was a huge concern. How am I going to pay this off? But yeah, there's options out there, just like there were scholarships when you were applying to school. You just kind of figure it out. But it is a lot of money. That average number is spot on to most of my friends, what we're looking at when we're coming out of our undergrad the last couple of years. So, yeah.
And I think to maybe some of your situation too, I think in recent history, it seems like the master's has become the new bachelor's, in a lot of hiring fields and things like that, it used to be, hey, just go get your bachelor's and you're good.
Yeah.
And now it seems like more and more companies, to set you apart, you want your master's. And for you, obviously, Lottie, because of Christ Community Church and people's generosity into investing into you and your husband, right? You were part of our residency program, which was committed to.
So we got to graduate with our master's without accruing any more debt, which I would never have gotten my master's if I had to take on more debt, just where I was at. Can't speak for my husband, but I think that, we were both just super, and neither of us would consider ourselves school people, but because of that fact that you're just more hireable when you have that master's degree. It's it's a concern and a pressure that's put on us, it feels. And so the fact that we could get that for free and not have to worry about more money was a huge blessing for sure.
So as we mentioned, this is because of a loan forgiveness plan that was laid out by the president. And let's just go over a little bit of the qualifications there, who this applies to. The Department of Education will provide up to $10,000 in debt cancellation to non-Pell Grant recipients and up to $20,000 in debt cancellation to borrowers who received a Pell Grant as an undergraduate. Borrowers are eligible if their individual income is less than $125,000 or $250,000 for married couples and or households. I feel like I just read the legal jargon at the end of a TV commercial. But that kind of spells out what it covers. And specifically, these are government loans. So let's talk a little bit about when did the government get involved with student loans and what effects that has caused in the past.
It'd probably be wise to say that none of us are financial experts by any means. And so, we're maybe some of us have more passion around this topic, but none of us are probably going to hit the nail on the head for every single thing. But from my understanding, as I did some of the research on where the government got involved in student loans was in the 60s, and a big part of that was they saw a need and a crisis to be able to jump in and give better loan rates. There's interest rates and all those kinds of things. And so a lot of that was privatized, previously. So you would take a loan from a bank and things like that. And so to help people have a better chance of actually going to college and qualifying for loans with, less, financial background and a lot of the things that you would keep you from being able to get a loan from a private institution, you were able to kind of bank on the government supporting you in some kind of ways to give you a loan and back that loan that maybe you wouldn't otherwise get to be able to help more people to get to college. And so I think that was a great thing. They wanted more of the citizens to be educated, less red tape, all that kind of stuff in order to get student loans and get more people educated, which, in turn serves our country well when there's more doctors, more people, engineers, more people in a lot of these fields that just need to have a thriving, country. And so they stepped in to help mitigate some of the risk and help more people have that opportunity for a secondary education that thought it was impossible, at one point. And so I know that's kind of where it seemed like they got involved, and there's been more and more litigation and different things that have happened since. But that's my understanding of where the government got involved. And then obviously over time, there's maybe some university have taken advantage of that, and that makes competition for pricing for school and tuition and all of that less of a thing because it's easier to get money. And so colleges are like, well, more people are able to come and we're able to get more money because most colleges are, for profit or in some kind of way they're making money, and so they're in the education business. But anytime there's people, we'll manipulate things to be able to make more income. And I think that's a part of it. So it seemed like tuition began to raise, more and more throughout history because of the ability to have more capital and so on and so forth because more people are able to go to college. And so that's probably what spiraled into some of these large numbers from my understanding as well.
Yeah, I saw one article that estimated that 60% of the amount of money that comes in a loan, colleges will raise their rates by 60%. So if you have a $10,000 loan, on average, the cost of school goes up by $6,000. And so what the schools are doing is they're saying, hey, if there's more money available, we're going to raise our rates, our profitability, our salaries, our building structure, administration infrastructure, all of those kinds of things. They see a golden opportunity. But what happens to the student is they have $10,000 worth of cost for $4,000 worth of value. And that's been one of the biggest things that's driven that upward spiral. And that the government, which I think was an altruistic idea, hey, let's make loans easily available, has actually driven the debt rate of college graduation much higher.
Yeah.
So how, with educational expectations, promises, costs, and other changes throughout the decades, do we still see the same return on investment for someone who's chasing after a college degree? Do we feel that is something that is equal now to what it was decades ago, or even when the government got involved with student loans?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I mean, for me, in my kind of experience, I felt like, one, my only option was college, and my only option to go to college was taking out student loans. And I had no concept of thousands of dollars or really, and for me, I knew I probably wasn't going to be making a huge amount of money. And I think teachers, things like that, go into it with that same kind of knowledge and expectation. And there are some other student loan forgiveness options out there for different careers and things like that we can talk about later. But I think for me, like as a millennial, quote unquote, there was this expectation, to go to college, and yet the money that was being made, the debt that you're being saddled with was more than ever, but the money that was being made wasn't quite increasing with the same amount of debt that people were inheriting from schools. And so They're becoming even some of the joking things about millennials out of that, like, oh, they just want to live in their parents' basement, and some of those things that are maybe truer of millennials and other generations, but some of it's because they're making wise financial decisions because they can't buy a house because they go to apply for a mortgage and they're like, you can't afford this. Like, you're barely going to be able to have your job and be able to pay those student loan payments every single month, let alone afford this. And so they're like, I don't live in my parents' basement because it's fun or I just like playing video games. It's because that's the wisest financial decision I could actually make in this moment. And so I think sometimes with the generational divide, like we see, hey, here's what my experience was, and I was able to just move right out and buy a house and do all that kind of stuff, even with student loan debt, but it's not an apples to oranges comparison in some kind of ways because of, we're making not quite as much, have more student loan debt, and can't afford those next steps of adulthood that maybe were promised or that we thought would happen as a result of getting the perfect job and then getting the house and the white picket fence and starting your family, all those kinds of things. And so
yeah, I think too that like money unrelated, it's like a lot of people my age had a really hard time. Like I'm Gen Z. I'm on the line, Gen Z, millennial, I don't know. But I know a lot of people my age had a really hard time graduating when they decided to go to college. Just like you were saying, Alex, it just became like a grind. And it had nothing to do with money, but like commitments are really hard for my generation. Like being consistent with things for 4 years at a time, like that's just it's just different. And so I think that when you don't graduate after you're paying for 2-3 years and can't seem to finish, which is the story for a lot of people that I know, obviously you're not gonna like make the most of all of the investment that you could have had when you graduated. And so it's just interesting how a lot of my friends have accrued a ton of debt for kind of nothing. Like they didn't earn the degree. So it's kind of a bummer. That pressure though, they were convinced like, I'm going to go. They didn't make the decision that you made. They said, I'm going to go to college because there's pressure to go, but this isn't even really what I want to do. And I'm willing to spend the money because I don't have a concept of what this loan means and what thousands of dollars mean. So I'm going to go anyway and then not even finish because this really isn't like what I wanted to do anyway. So I don't know. It's kind of a bummer. I don't have a statistic on how like what graduation rates are for my generation as opposed to even like a few years ago, but that's just the sense that I have about people my age. But
yeah, it should probably be pointed out that statistically college grads make more money. They'll make a lot more money over the course of a lifetime. But it varies a lot based on degree and field. So, someone who's in preschool education, not going to be a big payout like someone who's in engineering or doctor or lawyer or those types of things. So I think it's not necessarily a correlation only by degree, but on average by degree, it is. And of course, there's the extremes of, the entry tickets into professional domains that are going to pay off in a huge way.
Yeah. I'm curious, like Lottie, just since you were our most recent graduate here, like and you just got married. I mean, you're crossing a lot of those, thresholds or things in life. Like, have you run into like any real life scenarios of like, hey, we want to start to look at a house and we're saddled with loan debt, or any of those things that you've been like, that's what my dream was and I've been told no, or that's not a reality because of just the current situation, you guys, whatever you're willing to share.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that, so based on just conversations like with me, Isaiah's if I say Isaiah, that's my husband I'm talking about. But me and Isaiah, our parents both grew up and the rhythm of life was kind of like you either go to college or get a job and then you buy a house or, get married, buy a house and have a kid. And that's kind of like the rhythm of things. And we just got married. You're looking at a house and the idea of paying our loans and paying a mortgage was not even possible. And let alone paying rent. Like rent at apartments right now is so expensive. And so it was really overwhelming, like a very daunting thing. And I would imagine that a lot of people our age are in a similar situation. And, thankfully God's provided in tons of other ways and we're super blessed in that regard. But even the thought of, buying a house or having a kid or whatever is just not a possibility that we could conceptualize right now. Who's to say obviously people do it and it works out, but it is like really overwhelming and a point of tension and conflict and all those things. So
yeah. I mean, I remember getting married and knowing how much student loan debt I had, and like going to ask my father-in-law now, like to marry my wife, and like wanting to be honest about like, hey, here's the financial position I'm in, because he cared about having a man that could take care of his daughter, and they knew what field I was going into, and so there was, you know, some real like, okay, there's some faith that we're going to trust that you can do this. And then I remember, man, we found out we were pregnant, and you're just like, okay, I want to be like, is this responsible? Can we afford this, you know, right now in our lives? And so some of those things are even becoming more delayed for, you know, millennials or Gen Z, I think, because of just those real pressures too. So
yeah, and I'm 24 and Isaiah's 20, almost 27, which seems like, especially from my parents' perspective, a really average age to, you know, buy a house and start a family and those things. But it's not. Like, that's not the average age anymore. And so I think that those pressures don't help when it's really not as realistic as it was for them when they were my age. So it's interesting.
So one of the big conversations around this right now is that student loan forgiveness is almost some sort of intergenerational injustice, because those who benefit now are kind of punting the debt burden to the next generation. Is there truth behind that? Is that something that we would consider to be true? Is it kind of yes and, or maybe? Any thoughts on that, Mark? Do you want to take?
Yeah, I can start off with that. I think that's absolutely true. I think that's what we've done with this is we've increased federal deficit by, you know, somewhere between $300 billion and $1 trillion, depending on the estimates that are out there, and that burden is now going to fall on our kids and our grandkids. So, you know, the moral question that's behind this is, should people who did not take the loans pay for people who did take the loans? And to me, I think that's just a dramatic injustice. This is a horrible problem, and it's a worse solution to a horrible problem. So what you wind up with is, you know, people who decided not to go to college paying for people who went to college, and people who decided to go to community college paying for people who went to private colleges, and people who are plumbers winding up paying for doctors. And you have all of the kind of the wrong people paying for the loans. And it doesn't just come out of some tank somewhere. It comes out of taxpayers' pockets. And so it gets foisted onto people who didn't take the loans. So to me, there's a huge immorality behind the way the government decided to solve this one.
And it seems like in our government too, like any kind of whatever you want to call it, a blank check or things that are money to solve some of these problems. When we look at like our national debt, like it in some ways, I think for people, you'd look at that and you're like, well, just add it to the tab, because this isn't the only, you know, problem or huge bill or whatever that is footed by like the next generation, whether it's wars or like in all of these conversations, it's like we almost seem just calloused to the reality of like, well, someone's going to pay for it. And I've seen, you know, memes, you know, like this is going to be for your family and their children, you know, like all of those realities of, you know, what that's going to do, because people are like, well, we're never going to pay that off anyway. You know, we're going to always be in debt. So should we continue to dig into debt, but so that we can have a better, you know, as I talk to friends about this that are like, I just need this. I'm suffocating. I need all that. And we've been doing that in our country forever. So they did it to us, right? So why don't we continue to, so it can turn into that blame game of like, well, the other older generation put this pressure on us. They put these expectations on us. These colleges immorally continue to raise the prices of education so that I got here. So it wasn't really my problem that I created. It's, you know, and I think we can pass on the baton of, well, it was actually those people that created the problem, and I'm stuck with the problem, and I'm not I'm just continuing to pass along a problem that's been inherited more and more. And so you can kind of release yourself, I feel like, you know, people from the blame there, because it can always continue to be shifted. And that's probably a conversation in almost any kind of world. Like, where does the blame actually happen? But then where are we at? Like, there's a crossroads here, and how do we solve this problem? Do we continue to punt that on and on? I think is where we get into some of the moral, questions in that framework. So,
yeah, I think that my concern, or one of my concerns, I guess, with it is that there's already a lack of understanding amongst my generation of how loans work, and just like, how do you even begin to make a budget and figure out how to repay things and live responsibly when it comes to finances and things like that. And I think that one of my concerns with this is that if we just push that aside, like, student loans aren't the only time when you borrow things and need to pay them back. And I would just hate for people to continue to, like, I don't know, how debilitating to live a life where you'll never experience the freedom of without debt, like, looming over your head. And so I don't know. I feel bad that this could condone people to live that way. But I also, like you said, you're hearing people say, I really need this right now. I am drowning. I'm suffocating. I can't catch a break. And for those people, I feel for them. Like, how do you empathize with the people who really could use it right now, and without thinking about the implications that it will cause later on? I don't know. But
Which I think that's just a reality. I don't think the people that it's going to affect directly right now are not going to think about the impact that it's going to have down the road.
Yeah.
Because they're right now, this feels like the life
it's fixing
raft,
it. It's fixing my problems. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that add to what Lottie said, that we really need to do that kind of education before a kid gets a loan.
Yeah.
It's not just that the generation needs it after college. They need to be thinking about it before.
Yeah.
One dad I was talking to said he sat down with his daughter to fill out her stuff she needed to go into the university. And for her to get a loan was as easy as clicking on a few bubbles.
Yeah.
That's all. Hey, do you want a loan? Here's a loan. Here's $5,000. Here's $10,000. And all she had to do was click that she wanted the loan.
Yeah.
All her problems go away.
Right.
But because he was sitting next to her, he said, "Oh, sweetheart, let's think about this.
Yeah.
And let's talk about what a loan looks like at age 22. And they were able to talk things through. But how many students don't have a parent or a financially savvy parent that's sitting next to them to be able to help them make those decisions?
and that's called loan counseling, because technically you have to be like someone's supposed to
Do it with you.
legally. I remember when I was getting my loans, but it was very like, yeah, you'll be okay. Here's, the great statistics of how you're going to make more money graduating from our institution. And the people that are doing that usually are people that are working for the institution, not a non-biased.
Exactly.
They're recruiting you at the same time to come here and sign the dotted line, which feels a little bit like, okay, maybe there's some third parties that should be parents, obviously, but for those that don't have that luxury, non-biased people to an education system that are helping you, because that's a reality. There's fatherlessness. There's people wanting a first generation experience to get into a college that just don't have the luxury of good parents. So
Right.
When you consider that there's what we said it earlier, over 43 million Americans who have some sort of educational debt. So this is gonna, it's not like you can. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but it's not like you can refuse it. It's gonna go. You're gonna.
Yeah.
At least $10,000 of that potentially could go away. So even with that in mind, that is going to make a change. So how do we, how do we talk about that in a way that it's like, okay, yes, maybe they were victims of predatory loan services or things like that, and now they're getting relief. That is going to make a difference immediately. What are some benefits that we can see from that? I know in spite of the future ramifications, are there immediate benefits that we can even offer to people? Yet this is going to happen one way or another. So like, how can you now really live in that and use that moment to get yourself out of debt further, or see this as an opportunity to further yourself, better yourself? Are there any positives to that, or is it something that it's like, okay, this is just, because it's not that I'm not thinking about the future ramifications, but I do think a lot of people in this situation right now are probably not there. They're just thinking this is a life-saving moment for me and my family. And so I think, like, how can we be empathetic to that?
And I think in this current cultural moment, a lot of those people have kind of gotten used to some of that, with whether their company has a PPE loan and got, some of those kinds of things that happen from the government, or they got bail, they got money during, the last couple of years that were sent to them to be able to just pay their bills and all those kinds of things. It seems like they've gotten used to the idea of the government coming in and being a savior. I mean, for my family, that was helpful. It was beneficial to receive some of that kind of stuff just because of where we were at.
Even when the big corporations were bailed out in 2008 and things like that. I mean, people are just used to seeing this happen. The government comes in, takes care of it. Okay, debt, whatever. Like they're not thinking that that debt thing is almost just like magic money at this point. That doesn't really. So I'm benefiting from this now. Why? How am I supposed to be? Why is this actually a burden to me? What is the negative effects?
Yeah, it's kind of pitched as another economic stimulus plan, I think, by some people.
Yeah, I think the government has done a terrible thing in training Americans to not be responsible for their finances. I think that's a huge thing, whether, for some corporate people, for some people that were unemployed throughout COVID and didn't have to have a job and just got paid for more than they were making when they were employed pre-COVID, or those of us who kept jobs but had a little bit of bonus money come in. It's training us that you have more money than is in your budget, so just keep on spending.
Yeah.
And I think it's a horrible way to train the American people. I think this is going to be one more step in teaching people to be irresponsible with their finances and saying that there's not going to be any ramifications for that. And it's also incentivizing universities to keep on cranking up their costs so that the future generation will have a similar expectation. Oh, they bailed us out in 22. They're going to bail us out again, so just rack up the loans.
Yeah.
I mean, I even look at my daughter who's in college right now. You go, okay, if the expectation is that the government's going to pay off loans, why should we pay for college out of our bank account?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't we just, rack up a bunch of loans and expect the government to pay in the future, or even hope that the government will pay in the future? It's really incentivizing all the wrong behaviors in our culture.
Well, and you even see it in the parallels in the medical industry with, okay, well, insurance is going to pay for that for years and years and years. We saw that where it's like, oh, okay, I've got insurance and I'll pay $100 for a Band-Aid because it doesn't affect me, right? And now we have these exorbitant medical costs and we don't know what to do with ourselves. So.
Yeah.
And you have people with and I've seen them go up to politicians and seen some on social media of people with a real beef the other way that are like, my daughter just graduated and I just worked 4 jobs so that she could go through college, and I worked my butt off, and I didn't get to see my kids at sporting events, and I made sacrifices. Do I get some of that back? And to them, especially if you just graduate, if you didn't make the cutoff for whatever reason, I think there is, reason for complaint or reason for injustice or feeling like I'm not being treated fairly because my kid was born at a certain time or they graduated at a certain time. And so there's very real ramifications for that person to feel like an injustice was done against that family that made real sacrifices, or the person that made real sacrifices to serve and stay up late every night and pay for their college over the last few years. And they didn't have the money and they got no sleep for 4 years so that they didn't have, this problem, and they were doing it in a fiscally responsible way. And so I think there is very real reason for that person to feel like that's not fair.
Yeah.
This is an
Chipped.
injustice, And so,
Well, the other thing is the way that this is structured creates an inequity between those with privilege, the privilege of having an education and a high income, and those that don't. So the way it's structured is you can make up to $250,000 if you're a couple and have up to $40,000 debt forgiven. So you think about that, a doctor who makes $230,000 and his wife stays at home with the kids, has $40,000 or more in debt, he gets that all forgiven.
Yeah.
And most of us sitting on the sidelines go, he could pay that off in a year.
Yeah.
That's not even hard for him. So who's going to pay for that? It's the truck driver and the mechanic and the teacher and all of the people who are, working hard and paying their taxes wind up paying off big bills for professionals that are making big dollars.
So is that when you state it that way, because I know you mentioned plumbers earlier too, is that something because based on who is president later on and how they deal with the debt is going to affect those people primarily, is what you're saying? Because I think some of even the confusion around this is who actually is paying for it, because Biden has said things like, well, we're only going to tax those making $400,000 or more, so those people making less than $400,000 aren't going to cover. So that wouldn't be the plumbers and the doctors. So maybe you can add some clarity to that.
Yeah, so with this initiative, it was just a blanket forgiveness of the debt with no tax incentives or no tax increases that went along with it at all. So it's going to fall along the normal distribution lines of taxation. Now, for federal taxes, this is not true for other taxes, but federal taxes, the poor wind up paying a very small percentage of federal taxes. They oftentimes get to the end, they have zero on their federal taxes, they get all the money coming back. It's the people who are in the next range that wind up paying 27% or whatever of their taxes.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, it's truck drivers and plumbers and mechanics. It's
The middle class.
It's the middle class who's going to wind up paying for it. As much as you pay taxes now, well, let's just throw another $500 billion on top of that, and that's who's going to be paying. It's everybody paying instead of the people who took the loans paying.
But so the direct effect though wouldn't be an increase. You wouldn't see. I'm just saying, like, for people hearing that, they're not going to see an increase in the taxes they pay. It's just over time we're going to continue paying on that debt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. It's over time.
Yeah.
And I think it is important to note, that there have been student loan forgiveness from our federal government for different positions and jobs and abilities to have this happen before. I know from my wife, she went to UNL, graduated with a significant debt, like I mentioned earlier, and then took a job on purpose at the school she did, because there was incentives, for as a teacher, they know, okay, you're a public servant. And if you work at this school, if you make the commitment to work at this school, which we're having a trouble attracting teachers to because of Title I and some of the other things that they're dealing with, then, hey, this is available for you. And so there's that. There's other public servant student loan forgiveness options for people that are in the Peace Corps or other areas of public service that say, hey, if you do this for 10 years and you serve, because we know a lot of those people are not making a lot of money, but they're doing a lot of good for our society as a whole. Then there's availability for, student loan debt if you're making at least your minimum payment for, or qualifying payments for, and some of those are zero depending on the amount of money you make. For 120 payments, then you can have, up to a certain amount of government student loan debt. So it's not like it's never happened before, but this is taking it to a majority instead of a minority, and not even covering, hey, that was designed to be a blanket maybe for those who we know are way under that $125,000 range. They're probably like maybe a third of that range in salary for teachers and things like that are able to take advantage of that, rather than that $125,000 to me. I'm like, sign me up, to make that kind of money. I could make a lot of adjustments in my life personally. For me, if I'm making that, and if my wife's making that, then I'm living in a whole different kind of lifestyle and stage as well. And so it's not fully something new, but it's something that's been broadened fully without any kind of a real process or formality of you have to apply for all of that. You have to be approved for all of that. Seems like a lot more red tape and commitment out of you to receive that versus this, which is just kind of more like, well, you don't have to commit to really anything in order to receive this, or commit to doing good or bettering our society in order to receive that. And so that is a distinguishing factor between the two as well, I think. So.
Yeah, and the other programs that you mentioned are trying to incentivize a particular behavior, a particular job. It's really just a crafty way of paying teachers more to do the hard jobs, or to go to the Peace Corps, or whatever kinds of public service there is. Yeah. So it's not so much around the idea of, you made a decision, get a loan, we're going to pay it off because you can't. It's more along the lines of, man, we really need people in these positions. So in that case, there's I think you can make a moral case for that. It's when you're forgiving people almost regardless of income level. You could be a very high income level in that, or ability to pay it back in the future, and then you're charging the poorest of the poor, not the poorest of the poor. You're charging the middle class to be able to pay for that. And then there's the other cost that does affect the poor, I think, that we haven't talked about at all, is when you add another $500 billion in spending into the economy, that drives inflation. And we're in an inflationary time anyway, and inflation impacts the poor the worst. So you're adding to an inflationary fire that's already out of control that could result in recession and stagflation and a horrible economic environment. And then the government says, hey, let's make that inflation even worse by $500 billion in a single stroke of a pen.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that hurts the poor so badly that, to be honest, it angers me that you go, okay, so this is going to cut the knees out under the poor and the middle class in order to be able to benefit the privileged. And I think that's just harmful to our entire culture.
Do we actually know? I know you mentioned this, Eric, but because I haven't looked into it a ton, to be honest, as far as do you automatically get it or can you deny it? Do we know? Do we know that? Yeah. Because in those scenarios, I'm just curious, and I don't want to. If we don't know,
I don't.
100%, I don't want to fully speak into it.
I fully assume that. I don't know that for sure. Yeah.
I was just curious if there is that possibility or not, because then that even changes some of the conversation. If you can't say no, then what is the moral argument? You know, for that type of person, and
right.
I
think that's. I mean, that's my only concern is when we say this is you getting your loans forgiven is hurting the poor. We're pointing that at that person who has no choice in it. And so I think that's just something where I would almost be a little bit cautious about saying, hey, person who had nothing to do with this, you're going to affect the poor. You know what I mean? Like you're hurting the poor. So that's where I'm like, I have a little bit of trouble with even that language around that, I think. But maybe, I don't know, maybe there's clarity that you could even provide for that, to help me understand that language.
Yeah, it makes a big difference if you have a choice or not. That's why I say, I don't know if you have a choice or not in this one. But if you do and you say, okay, my saying yes to receiving this money is actually going to charge my kids, my grandkids, the middle class, and the poor extra money, then you have a moral dilemma.
Yeah.
Am I going to pay my own debt, which I signed a contract for and promised to pay? I think that's the right thing to do. I feel the same way about bankruptcy, that if you can avoid it, it's something that's immoral because you've signed your name to it. So as a follower of Jesus, are you going to pay your debts or are you not going to pay your debts? And my encouragement is it's your debt to pay. Asking somebody else to pay your debts or forcing somebody else at the government's hand is a real moral conundrum.
Yeah, I think I'm like right in the middle of that conundrum. If it is optional, like you have the ability to resist it just because like I said, like Alex was talking about, and like I mentioned earlier, like the opportunity to be match my loan repayments or whatever through the denomination that I'm licensed in here at Christ Community Church. I think that the amount is within like $1,000 of like, do I accept that whatever $10,000 or do I just pay and keep doing what I was doing before, keep fulfilling, the plan. And so it's interesting to think about. Even today, I think is the first time that I've sat and thought, if there is a choice in the matter, like the right, just like you said, like the right thing. I signed up for this. I knew that this was what I was going to have to pay this whole time. But the amount of people in thinking about conversations after that of like, why would you decide? Like, why would you decline $10,000 to repay your loans? Or it's going to be interesting. So that got me thinking. I didn't know. Yeah, I kind of assumed that it was you had to accept it as well. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I had a conversation with a guy that in my community group the other day that was talking about this and how he's trying to think through it in a moral way. And he's like, to me, I can take that $10,000 of forgiveness and I don't have to work at the night job at Target anymore. And now I'm going to be with my friends and now I have more opportunity. And I think we can all say now I'm going to have more opportunity to work at the church. And now I'm going to actually have the opportunity to do more good. So take that as an investment into me, into my family. And now I can get a better ROI on that investment that was given to me from that kind of perspective rather than, and maybe that's justification, maybe that's whatever. But to me, I'm like, I could see how that argument plays out, especially if you are somebody that is going to do that and is going to be more present now all of a sudden in your kid's life because that burden of paying that back within the next 5 years or whatever is exchanged for that. And I see him and again, you can't speak for everybody that's going to just take this as a get out of jail free card. I can see him sincerely meaning that and sincerely leading to him being a better father and him being a better parishioner at our church and having more time to actually invest that he always wanted to, but hasn't been able to because of this, debt. And so that was the first time I kind of heard someone in a real world scenario thinking through how this is actually going to be, an investment. And that was his story, and we didn't get into it. He was just kind of sharing, that's my story, and that's how I'm thinking about it. And so that gave me something else to think through as we do postulate this and think about the nuance and everybody inside of that kind of conversation. So what about the Bible? So we haven't talked a lot about scripture. I think there's things like, Jubilee, that every 7 years you could have something forgiven, or some of those ideas around scripture. Obviously, there's scripture saying debt should be, forgiven. May I forgive those the way forgive me, Father, the way that I forgive those of debts. And then there's obviously scripture that might leave people confused that are like, no, you need to pay off your debt. And so maybe it leaves some Christians in a conundrum of like, which one wins out? Which scriptural, because I think people could cherry pick either and support it biblically without getting into some of the exegesis. And so I think that's why I'd love to hear any of our thoughts, but some thoughts on how do we navigate this in a scriptural lens as well.
Yeah. One of the things I think is helpful, Jubilee is the one that I've heard mentioned the most as I've been seeing online posts and so forth. One of the things that's helpful to know is that Jubilee happened every 49 or 50 years.
Oh, yeah, 7 times 7. Yeah.
7 times 7, yeah. But we don't actually have a historical moment that it was actually executed in the history of Israel. But let's say theoretically it was. Let's just put that on the piece of paper and assume that was something that was going to happen. Well, everybody would know when Jubilee year was, and everybody would set their loan levels according to how long a person had to pay it back. So they wouldn't do something that would take 30 years of payback if there's only 3 years left until the Jubilee. Everyone would kind of moderate things with that. Now, Jubilee was an amazing idea in that it would set all the tables, reset all the tables, wipe out everybody's debts, give you back the land that your ancestors had, and it would create an environment where you did not have the dichotomy of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So, brilliant idea, but it would have been moderated by people making their choices according to that idea being there. This is a very different scenario in that, people are taking out a loan from an institution or from the government with the expectation that it's going to be paid back fully over however many years it would be paid off. So I think Jubilee is just not a good application of the scripture to this particular principle.
Yeah. I was thinking about the Matthew 6:12 that talks about forgive us our debts as we forgive those who have debts against us. Just thinking through that is like a huge, if you take that at, as it is, that means that this initiative is a great thing because it's just being biblical and obedient. But I think that a lot of examples, I even think of the story, and you guys can help me out, but it's the story of the workers in the field, and they both did maybe one worked more than the other and they didn't get paid equally. The one who did less work got paid more. And I think that's a little different than debt, but just that's like a 1v1 exchange. And it's not like we owe, the debt that I owe in student loans is owed to one person. And it's not a personal thing. And the fact that just blanket stating hey, everybody's is forgiven. I'm just, maybe this is the right thing. Maybe this is just doing even a biblical act. It's not that personal, one-to-one forgiveness thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, and I think Proverbs, a few different places talk about this. The wicked borrows but does not pay back, or that's in Psalm 37, but Proverbs 22, do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate, for the Lord will plead their cause and rob the life of those who rob them. That's pretty intense. And 14:31, whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. And that seems to be really getting at the heart of a lot of what you're saying as far as, hurting the poor? Am I hurting the poor? Am I taking, some of my privilege and using that to hurt the poor, which we see obviously in Jesus's model is like, hey, he considered equality with God not something, not using his privilege to his advantage, but he took on the form of a servant. And so, but I have seen the gospel, the overall debt, all debts are paid, by acknowledging my sin and all that kind of stuff, make more headlines and secular articles than I've probably ever seen it over, if you're a Christian, how could you be a Christian and say Jesus paid it all, declare that, sing that on a Sunday, and not be in favor of economic debt? So are these parallels, or is that kind of dangerous to equate the gospel, the message of the gospel, to this student loan forgiveness? Because I don't even think we want this equally against all debt, like every credit card debt, everyone's mortgage, all of that kind of stuff. If you're taking that full argument of all debt should be forgiven, let's just, anybody that owes you money, just,
whatever.
So how do we start to answer those questions? Because I think that is one that, especially in a secular culture, are like, you're hypocrites. You're just hypocritical because this is what you bank your entire religion on in some ways. And so how do we start to answer that?
Yeah, I think one of the first things to take a look at is who pays the debt.
Yeah.
So in the gospel, God pays our debt for us. He's got infinite resources, infinite love, infinite power, and he decides to take his wealth and spend it on our behalf. And there's an incredible gift that's being given to us through that. But what he doesn't say is, I'm going to forgive your debt and make all of the rest of the people pay it off.
Yeah.
And that's where things are very different.
Yeah.
If somebody said to me, hey, I've got a big student loan and I've got a wealthy person from the church who said they're going to pay it off for me, I'd be like, rock on, accept the gift, enjoy it. That's what the gospel is.
Yeah.
It's not a redistribution of debt from people who owe it to people who don't owe it. It's a redistribution from the wealthy, loving, powerful God of the universe who gives it on behalf freely for those who don't have the resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. That's happened in medical debt or so many. Debt is such a broad term, but I don't think we'd want to apply that, or if anybody would probably feel comfortable economically just applying that gospel principle to just everything. Everybody right now, anybody that has debt on the count of 3, it's all wiped away, worldwide, because everything would crash. This is a different kind of economy than eternity. And again, like you said, Mark, who actually paid that's being paid by the one whom we had a debt against, on an eternal cosmic level. And so that's good.
So it sounds like we need to find somebody who's gonna, has just like trillions of dollars in their pocket to just,
Yeah, that
supply all the money.
That $500 billion giver that's out there. Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, wherever you are.
And maybe this sparks a person that does have that ability to do that in somebody's life, to be more generous. That's what the gospel would look like. If we probably wouldn't be in this position overall in some ways if we all lived a little more generous life, if we all said, hey, I've got more money than I could ever have anything to do with it, and I could take some of this and invest it into somebody else's life in a way of, I'm giving something, I'm sacrificing something of mine in order to help improve somebody's life. That picture of the church would be way attractive if most of us would continue to take our resources and sow them into the lives of those who don't owe us anything. And yet we sow that into their lives and continue to bless them. I think that would be a powerful thing.
That's the
for
gospel
people.
parallel right there.
I do wonder, like, as we talk through this, one thing, I'm the type of person I love a good answer to the problem, right? Like, what's the solution, and we can't obviously just solve that around this table, but I am curious what all of your thoughts are on solutions to this, because I think a pin stroke and your debt's gone, obviously that doesn't solve the bigger problem of, like we talked about, with predatory loan services and these schools taking advantage of the governmental loans, things like that. Are there other solutions? I mean, I've heard people talk about public college. Well, we have public school. Why wouldn't we have public college? And I thought, well, okay, maybe that's a solution. I mean, I'm not probably the one to answer that fully, but we pay taxes that go to a fire department, and God forbid your house doesn't burn down, you're not actually taking advantage of that. So it's one of those things where we're used to paying for things that we're not always using, and we're paying for other people. And so I think that side of it isn't necessarily a negative. So what are some solutions out there that when we're voting, when we're looking at government leaders, when they're talking about these things? Because I mean, as a parent, even I would say, I mean, my kids aren't in college, but if my daughter was like, Dad, guess what? I just got $10,000 of my student loans forgiven. I have a really hard time saying, how dare you? You know what I mean? Like, I would celebrate that with her because I know the burden that she felt was lifted. So it's like, how can we talk about this in a way that's like leading towards solutions and not just the discourse and who's right and who's wrong, that sort of thing.
I think that my solution, I guess, is just me offering advice / encouragement to people in my situation, paying off loans, just in the middle of it. Is like, if in your power and ability, and like if you've committed to paying a certain number of amount of loans for school, just like Mark was saying, just commit to that and continue to execute the plan that you had in place. And if you don't have a plan and your only option is to receive this $10,000 with like gratitude, and this is your, like your saving grace right now, I think just think beyond yourself in the future and know that when I decide I'm going to keep with my plan, my repayment plan, and eventually my loans will be paid or whatever, I'm just trusting that act of like being committed to something that you signed up for is going to serve you well, and that God's going to use that. And I don't know if obviously me deciding to do that and saving the government $10,000, saving some, taxpayers $10,000 somewhere is not going to be noticed in the grand scheme of things. But just knowing that, I think that if more people in my generation understood how to do that responsibly, that it could make a difference. So yeah, I guess if you're listening and you're in your 20s and trying to pay off your loans, keep it up and we'll figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll add to that, just right on what Lottie said. If you're somebody who's listening and you say, I need wise financial advice and I'd love to get some resources that would help me to be a financial genius, or at least wise in the way I use my money, Christ Community has a connection with Dave Ramsey, where if you're an attender of Christ Community, which really just means if you are a part of us on site or online, you can be able to get those resources for free. And just so you know, we made those available in our Strapped series, which is all about money. And if you're an online attender of the Strapped series, you're somebody who can take advantage of that. And we would love to serve you in that way.
Yeah.
A couple of other things that I would throw out is I think that there are some moral alternatives for how to fix the system that we have. It's harder to say we're going to go back in time and fix the stuff that happened in the past. But I think our first step is to say, how do we stop colleges from overcharging? And how do we stop students from overborrowing? And how do we help people understand these things in advance? So one of the alternatives, I think, is community college is one of the most genius things we have. You can get 2 years of schooling for about 10% of the price of going to a full university, and encouraging people to go there. Some people have even said, this would be a good investment of federal dollars to make community college free for people, so it goes from cheap to free. I think that's a moral way of being able to help subsidize somebody. You save them $50,000 by giving them free community college for 2 years. Is a brilliant alternative. Or create borrowing caps for students, where you just say, you can't borrow more than this from the federal government, so that they don't wind up $80,000 or $120,000 or $150,000 in debt. It caps out at 30 or 40 or whatever it is that makes people think reasonably, can I actually afford this? And what it'll be like when I get out of school. Increasing Pell grants for our neediest students. Pell grants are topped out, I think, at $5,500, maybe $6,500 right now. And if we increase that, then our neediest students who are coming from our impoverished backgrounds they wouldn't have to take a loan at all. They would just get it as a grant from the federal government. And I would far rather see the government making grants in advance than forgiving decisions on the backside. So I think those are a few possible alternatives governmentally that make sense from a justice perspective. They help solve the problem, and they help stop the bleeding.
Another solution that's out there I know is that isn't higher ed related is something like Google certificates. I mean, that's something that's relatively new, but this is something that people can go in, they can earn in digital marketing, in IT, data analytics, project management, and UX design. They can earn a certificate in that for free from Google, and that prepares them for a job. People will hire you if you have that certificate.
Yeah.
And so that's an option that is completely debt free, and you can make that choice. And I think part of me, my brain set tends to lean into the futurist perspective, and it's like, what are we doing now though to lay those tracks, to think about that? Because why do we want to even strap our kids with any debt? You know, why do we want them to even have to work off that debt? Like, because we're telling them they have to have that degree or they have to have that title. What does that even mean 10 years from now? Does that title even mean anything? So it's just like, as we work on this, is there a better, solution to how we can guide the next generation?
Yeah, and there's institutions out there like Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. They have their entire course catalog, every class online for free for anybody who wants it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So if you say I'm concerned about education and not about a degree, you can get an MIT education, read the same books, watch the same lectures, take the same tests as students in class, get an MIT education for $0.
Yeah.
So if you say, hey, I don't have the money for MIT, but I'd sure love to learn what they learn there, you can do it for free.
Yeah. I mean, I think hiring practices add into this. Like, do we just hire people because they have certain letters behind their name, which does not actually mean they're more qualified for a job? There's some people that are way more street smart, way more savvy with people, way more on all of that didn't have those name, those letters behind their name or didn't graduate from that place. But you just can't just throw away their resume because it doesn't have a certain school or a certain amount of letters behind. I mean, obviously there's wisdom and all that, and I want somebody with those letters working on my child doing surgery, right? But I think there's some of those hiring practices. I think of the way we consume, and I mean, not to go back to last week, but we just fired a coach and he got $7.5 million in a buyout from the university. What scholarships could have been funded from some of that, or what, how does what we consume or what entertains us actually begin to cripple, like what if a lot of the money the university is making actually goes back into the students' lives and actually goes back into education rather than just, building a bigger brand. And obviously that goes back and forth because building a bigger brand does help students grow and thrive and, some of those things, and does provide scholarships and so on and so forth. But I think those are a few of the small things that we could do. And as parents, what are those expectations? How do we face a kid when they don't meet the expectations that we have on them that are maybe because we didn't get it done? It's baggage we've brought into our own life, and we always saw this picture of a child. How tight are we holding the picture of our kid's future and those expectations? How do we communicate it? I think we can always continue to grow in that and grow in grace as we listen to the nuance of people in these kinds of conversations, that not everyone's evil because they're saying, I need this, so are we able to listen and not just get sucked into all the political pundency of this as we post it out on our social medias and build, burn bridges instead of building bridges. And so I think sometimes we'll just cast all of that out there without hearing stories and sitting across from people and listening to people's stories and building empathy. Instead, it's just like, well, I'm going to air my opinion. And Proverbs says, we shouldn't delight in airing our opinions, but we should delight in listening to others. And so I think, which were you delighting a little bit more in, airing your opinion, or a fool just delights in airing their own opinion, but a wise person delights in hearing from others. And so I think that's wise too.
And I think, adding to that, it's just when you look at that social discourse out there, and there's so much of, well, this isn't fair, or I didn't get that, or why did, and it's just like, we didn't we didn't sign this into place, right? Like, I mean, let's at least celebrate with people where we can. Because there are people who are experiencing burdens, and if this is something that's going to lift them out of that, then let's celebrate with them, because they're in a place where maybe they are being freed of something, and that we don't know what that'll lead to. So either way, it can be a good thing.
Yeah, one thing I'd add in for parents who are on the front side of thinking about a college education for their kids, I did a little seminar that we've put on our YouTube channel at CCC Omaha. 10 ways to get your kid through college debt-free.
There you
go. Thinking about it in advance and having those conversations when a kid is 15 or 16 can make a huge difference, can make like $100,000 difference in how much college costs. So I'd recommend that too.
Yeah, check that out.
Yeah, I think that for parents too, I know that my parents just didn't know like how the process of applying for loans and everything worked. And so I think like as I hope to have kids one day and whatever, that I'm hoping to keep up on how things work, because they're going to change, and just admit, like, not taking that personally, but just embracing it for what it is, and being open to new knowledge on things is super helpful. So
yeah, that's great. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks Lottie for joining us. Thanks Mark for joining us.
You bet.
Yeah.
Alex, as always. This is one of those tough conversations, but I think we passed the test of flying colors. So if you have any questions or concerns, you'd like to reach out to us, you can do that on our Instagram or TikTok at CCCOMA Podcast, or you can send an email directly to the podcast. That's podcast@cccomaha.org. I feel like I said podcast about 10 times. Or now you can call our number, leave us a voicemail. That's 402-885-9930. We'd love to hear your voice. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.